The small monitoring station floated quietly near Neptune. Inside, Jake Morrison sat at his desk drinking cold coffee. He was 42 years old and had worked at this station for 8 years. Most nights were boring. He watched the screens and looked for signals from deep space. Usually there was nothing interesting. His partner, Lisa Grant, was telling a bad joke about space travel when suddenly the alarms started making loud noises. Both of them jumped in their seats. Jake's coffee spilled on his uniform, but he did not care. His eyes were locked on the screen in front of him. Something strange was appearing on his computer. The signal was not like anything they had seen before. It moved in patterns that looked mathematical and precise. This was not random noise from space. This was made by someone intelligent. Someone was trying to communicate. Jake's hands moved quickly across his keyboard. He started the translation program that scientists had built many years ago. Nobody thought they would ever really use it. The program worked slowly, trying to understand the alien signal. After a few minutes, words appeared on the screen. 3 words kept repeating over and over. "Help us coming, please." Lisa moved closer to her screen. She was trying to find where the signal came from. Her face became very serious. The signal was coming from a star system very far away. It was 47 light-years from Earth. That meant the light from that star took 47 years to reach them. The message was coming from a place humans had never visited. Within 10 minutes, their boss arrived. Captain Helen Brooks looked tired because they had woken her up from sleep. But her eyes were sharp and focused. She stood between Jake and Lisa, looking at both screens. More information was coming through now. The aliens were sending pictures and maps. They were sending information about their bodies and their enemies. Helen made a quick decision. She called Earth immediately. This was too important to wait. Within 1 hour, every government on Earth knew the truth. Humans were not alone in the universe. Somewhere far away, alien beings needed help. Someone was attacking them. The message was sent to scientists around the world. Dr. Christine Yang had spent 15 years building programs to talk with aliens. She never thought she would really need them. Now she sat in a special room under the Pentagon in Washington. Military officers and scientists filled the room. Everyone was watching the main screen. The alien message played for everyone to see. The creature on the screen was different from humans, but also similar in some ways. She had 4 arms instead of 2. Her eyes were very large and showed emotions clearly. Her skin glowed with colors that changed as she talked. Christine's computer said the colors showed how the alien was feeling. The alien introduced herself as Ambassador Lyra. She spoke in a beautiful musical language. The computers had trouble understanding it perfectly, but the main message was clear. Her people were called the Zanari. They had lived peacefully for 3,000 years. They explored space and traded with other civilizations. They had never known real war. Then, 6 months ago, everything changed. A race called the Kryn arrived in their space. The Kryn were not explorers. They were not traders. They were conquerors. They moved from one star system to another, taking everything they wanted. Their technology was very powerful. Their weapons destroyed everything in their path. They did not talk. They did not negotiate. They just attacked. The Zanari had already lost 2 of their colony worlds. Their defense ships tried to fight but failed. Thousands of Zanari had died. Now the Kryn were coming to their home world. They would arrive in less than 1 month. The Zanari did not have enough ships to stop them. They did not have enough weapons. They were going to lose everything. In their desperation, the Zanari sent distress signals in all directions. They sent them to every part of space they could reach. They hoped someone would hear them. They hoped someone would help. Most of their people thought it was useless. Nobody would come. Nobody would risk their lives for strangers. But the Zanari had noticed something interesting about Earth. Their scanners showed that Earth was what they called a death world. The gravity was very strong. The weather was dangerous. The animals were deadly. The Zanari could never survive on such a planet. But humans lived there. Humans had evolved there. The Zanari thought that maybe, just maybe, beings from such a harsh world would be strong enough to fight the Kryn. Christine paused the video and looked around the room. Nobody spoke. Everyone was thinking about what they had just seen. These aliens were facing extinction. They were asking for help from a species they had never met. General Marcus Stone stood up from his chair. He was an old Marine who had fought in many wars. His face was covered with scars from battles. He had seen terrible things in his life, but he had also learned that sometimes you have to fight for what is right even when it is dangerous. The general looked at the frozen image of Ambassador Lyra on the screen. He thought about her people and their desperate situation. He thought about the Kryn and what they represented. He thought about what would happen if nobody helped the Zenari. Would the Kryn stop after destroying one world, or would they keep going until they reached Earth? The room stayed quiet for a long time. Then the general spoke. His voice was strong and clear. He said that Earth needed to respond to this message. They needed to help the Zenari, not just because it was the right thing to do, but because the Kryn represented a threat to all civilizations. If they were not stopped now, they would eventually come to Earth. Other people in the room started talking. Some agreed with the general. Others were afraid. They said that responding to the message would tell the Kryn where Earth was located. They said it would bring danger to humanity. They said Earth should stay hidden and safe, but General Stone had an answer for them. He explained that the Zenari signal probably already showed the Kryn where Earth was. The signal had gone out in all directions. The Kryn had very advanced technology. They could probably trace the signal back to its source. Hiding was no longer an option. The only choice was to fight or wait to be attacked later. The debate continued for hours, but slowly people began to agree. The decision was made. Earth would answer the Zenari call for help. Humanity would send ships to fight the Kryn. It was a dangerous decision. It was a scary decision, but it was the right decision. Somewhere far away, people needed help, and humans were going to answer that call. The United Nations called an emergency meeting. Leaders from every major country came together. For the first time in a long time, old arguments and disagreements seemed small and unimportant. There was something bigger to worry about now. An alien threat was out there in space, and another alien species needed help. Secretary General Patricia Williams started the meeting. Around the big table sat representatives from all the powerful nations. Ambassador Chen Wei from China sat across from Gregory Martinez, the American Secretary of Defense. Russian General Dmitry Volkov was talking quietly with Klaus Hoffmann, who ran the European Space Agency. Everyone had their own opinions, but they all knew this decision would change human history forever. The debate was intense. Some people argued that Earth should stay quiet and hidden. They said that going to help the Zenari would tell the whole universe where humans lived. They said it would bring danger to Earth. Other people said that the danger was already coming. The Zenari signal had gone out everywhere. If the Kryn were smart enough, they could already find Earth. General Stone spoke again. He reminded everyone that the Kryn would not stop after destroying the Zenari. Conquerors never stopped with just one victim. They would keep moving through space, taking over more worlds, getting stronger. Eventually, they would reach Earth. Better to fight them now, with allies, than to wait and face them alone later. Christine Yang presented more information about the Zenari. Her team had studied everything in the alien message. The Zenari seemed honest and peaceful. They had never started wars. They had traded fairly with other species. They were asking for help because they truly had no other choice. They were going to die if nobody came. The voting took several hours, but the result was clear. Almost everyone agreed. Humanity would respond to the distress call. They would send ships to help the Zenari fight the Kryn. It was decided. Now they needed to figure out how to do it. Admiral Victoria Cross was chosen to lead the mission. She was 53 years old and had spent her entire adult life in space. She had commanded the defense forces on Mars. She had designed the new defense systems that protected Earth from asteroids and debris. She was smart, calm, and respected by everyone. If anyone could lead this mission, it was her. Admiral Cross accepted the assignment without hesitation. Then she heard the timeline. She had exactly 1 month to prepare, 1 month to gather ships, 1 month to train crews, 1 month to prepare for a battle against an enemy they knew almost nothing about. It seemed impossible, but she had to try. The shipyards around Earth and Mars became incredibly busy. Workers operated 24 hours a day. Every ship that could fly was being changed into a warship. The experimental faster-than-light engines that scientists had been testing for years were quickly installed on military vessels. There was no time for more testing. They would have to work, or the mission would fail before it started. Commander Alex Hunter watched the work from the bridge of his ship. The vessel was called the Defiance. 3 weeks ago, it had been a mining ship designed to break apart asteroids and collect valuable minerals. Now it was becoming a warship. Workers were covering it with armor. They were replacing the mining lasers with railguns. They were adding missile launchers to every available space. Alex had been a mining supervisor. He knew everything about running a mining operation in space. But he knew very little about military tactics and space combat. The crash training program had been brutal. For 3 weeks he had studied constantly. He learned about weapon systems and defensive strategies. He learned how to command a crew in battle. He learned how to make quick decisions when lives depended on him. His crew was learning too. Lieutenant Maria Santos had been a competitive shooter before joining the space program. Her eyes were incredibly sharp, and her reactions were very fast. She was perfect for controlling the weapons. Chief Engineer Paul Chen could fix anything mechanical. He understood machines better than most people understood other humans. He would keep the ship running no matter what happened. Kyle Murphy was the navigation officer. He had an amazing talent for plotting courses through dangerous space. He could calculate angles and speeds in his head faster than most computers. With him guiding the ship, they could avoid most threats and position themselves for the best attacks. All across the fleet, similar stories were happening. The carrier ship Liberty was being prepared under Captain Frank Weber. It would carry 200 fighter craft. The pilots were former test pilots and military aviators. They were the best humanity had. The battleship Vengeance, commanded by Captain Diana Foster, was being loaded with enough weapons to destroy a small moon. In total, 47 ships would make the journey. It was not a huge fleet, but every ship represented the best that humanity could build. Every crew member was a volunteer who knew they might not come home. Every weapon was the most advanced that human science could create. Admiral Cross called a meeting 3 days before departure. All the ship commanders gathered in a large conference room. She stood at the front and looked at each of them. These people would lead humanity's first interstellar war. Some of them looked confident, others looked nervous. All of them looked determined. She began speaking. Her voice was calm but strong. She told them the truth about what they were facing. The Kryn had thousands of ships. The human fleet had 47. The Kryn had been fighting for years. Most humans had never seen real combat in space. The odds were bad, very bad. But she also reminded them of something important. Humans had always been outnumbered in their greatest battles. They had always faced enemies with more resources and better positions. What made humans dangerous was not their numbers. It was their ability to adapt. It was their creativity. It was their refusal to give up even when everything seemed hopeless. The Kryn fought with perfect coordination and massive numbers. They followed programmed tactics. They never changed their strategies. But humans could think. They could improvise. They could come up with new ideas in the middle of battle. That was their advantage. That was how they would win. Admiral Cross finished her speech with a simple statement. The Zanari had asked for help. The Kryn thought they could destroy anyone who opposed them. Both of them were about to learn what humans were really capable of. The fleet would leave in 3 days. They would jump across space to the Zanari system, and they would show the galaxy that Earth was not defenseless. The commanders left the meeting with fire in their eyes. They returned to their ships and prepared their crews. The next 3 days passed in a blur of final preparations. Weapons were tested. Supplies were loaded. Families said goodbye to their loved ones, not knowing if they would ever see them again. Finally, the day of departure arrived. The fleet gathered in orbit around Earth. Billions of people watched on their screens. This was history being made. This was humanity stepping out into the galaxy as warriors, as protectors, as allies to those who needed help. The ships formed up in their assigned positions. Admiral Cross gave the final order. The fleet activated their faster-than-light drives, and humanity left Earth behind. heading into the unknown to fight for strangers they had never met. The moment of the first jump was something nobody could truly prepare for. Alex Hunter sat in his command chair on the Defiance, his hands gripping the armrests tightly. Around him, his crew worked at their stations. Everyone looked nervous. The countdown reached its final seconds. 10, 9, 8. The tension in the air was almost painful. When the drives activated, reality itself seemed to break. Space twisted in ways that hurt to look at. Colors appeared that Alex had never seen before. Time felt wrong, like it was moving both too fast and too slow at the same time. For a moment that felt like forever and an instant together, Alex felt like he existed everywhere and nowhere. His mind could not understand what was happening. Then it was over. The view screen showed normal space again. But the stars were different. The constellations were unfamiliar. They had jumped 15 light years in what felt like seconds. The technology had worked. They had crossed a distance that would take light 15 years to travel, and they had done it almost instantly. Alex looked around his bridge. Maria looked pale but determined. Paul was checking his engineering systems carefully. Kyle was already plotting the next jump. Everyone seemed shaken by the experience, but nobody was panicking. They were professionals and they had a job to do. Reports came in from other ships. Some crew members felt sick. Others reported headaches or dizziness, but there were no serious injuries. The jump had been successful across the entire fleet. Medical Officer Sarah Mitchell moved through the horizon, checking on people who looked unwell. She reassured them that the feelings were normal and would pass quickly. The plan was to make 4 jumps total. Each jump would carry them closer to the Zanari system. Between jumps, they would rest for 6 hours. The drives needed time to cool down and recharge. The crews needed time to recover from the strange effects of faster-than-light travel. During the first rest period, Alex found himself unable to sleep. He wandered down to the observation deck. Through the large window, he could see other ships in the fleet. Their running lights blinked in the darkness of space. In the distance, unfamiliar stars glowed with colors slightly different from the stars near Earth. He was not alone on the observation deck. Several crew members stood there looking out at the view. They talked quietly among themselves. Some wondered what Earth looked like from this distance. Others talked about what they would do if they survived the coming battle. A few simply stood in silence, lost in their own thoughts. The second jump came 6 hours later. This time everyone knew what to expect. It was still uncomfortable and strange, but the fear was less. The crew handled it better. They were learning and adapting. That was what humans did best. During the second rest period, the ship commanders met in a virtual conference. Admiral Cross connected all the ships together through a video system. She wanted to discuss strategy and make sure everyone understood the plan. The meeting room filled with faces from different ships. Some commanders looked tired. Others looked excited. All of them looked ready. Captain Diana Foster from the Vengeance brought up an important topic. She had been studying the intelligence the Zanari provided about the Kryn. The enemy used swarm tactics. They would send thousands of small ships against defensive positions. Their strategy was simple: overwhelm the enemy with numbers. For every Kryn ship destroyed, 2 more would take its place. The weapons technology was interesting. The Kryn used energy weapons that were actually less powerful than human railguns. Their missiles were slower than human missiles, but they had so many ships that they could fire thousands of weapons at once. It was like being attacked by a swarm of angry bees. Each individual bee was not very dangerous, but 1,000 bees could kill you. What worried everyone most was the Kryn attitude toward casualties. They did not care about losses. They would sacrifice 10 ships to destroy 1 enemy ship without any hesitation. They fought like machines with no fear and no self-preservation. This made them incredibly dangerous. Most armies would retreat when they lost too many soldiers. The Kryn just kept coming. Captain Frank Weber from the Liberty expressed his concerns. His carrier held 200 fighter craft with 200 pilots. The pilots were the best humanity had, but they were badly outnumbered. The Kryn fleet reportedly had thousands of small attack craft. Even if every human pilot destroyed 10 enemies, it might not be enough. Admiral Cross listened to all the concerns. Then she spoke. Her words were calm but powerful. She reminded everyone that humans had always been outnumbered in their greatest battles. At Thermopylae, 300 Spartans held off an army of thousands. At the Battle of Britain, A handful of pilots defended their island against overwhelming odds. Throughout history, humans had won against superior numbers through courage, intelligence, and determination. The Kryn had numbers and firepower. But humans had something more important. They had flexibility. They could change their tactics in the middle of battle. They could think of new solutions to unexpected problems. They could work together as a team while also acting independently when needed. The Kryn followed programmed patterns. Humans could break those patterns. Admiral Cross revealed part of her plan. She would not fight the battle the way the Kryn expected. She would not form a defensive line and try to hold it. Instead, she would use mobility and surprise. She would hit them where they were weak. She would make them react to human movements instead of following their own plan. It was risky, but it was their best chance. The meeting ended with everyone feeling more confident. They had a plan. They had capable leaders. They had good ships and brave crews. They were ready to face whatever came next. The third jump brought them very close to Zanari space. The crew could feel the tension building. They were almost at their destination. Soon they would meet the aliens they were coming to help. Soon they would face the enemy they were coming to fight. Alex spent the third rest period checking his ship one more time. He walked through the corridors talking to crew members. He visited the weapons bay and watched Maria running final tests on the railguns. He went to engineering and saw Paul making last-minute adjustments to the power systems. Everyone was working hard, making sure everything was perfect. In the crew quarters, people were writing messages to their families. They knew these messages might be the last words their loved ones ever received. Some people wrote long letters explaining their feelings. Others kept it simple, just saying they loved their families and were proud to serve. The messages would be sent back to Earth if the ships did not return. The fourth and final jump came exactly on schedule. This time, when they emerged from faster-than-light travel, their sensors immediately picked up signs of civilization. The Zanari system was ahead of them. Radio signals filled space. Artificial satellites orbited planets. Cities glowed on planetary surfaces. This was a living, thriving civilization. Or at least it had been before the Kryn came. But the sensors also showed something terrible. Debris fields marked the locations of recent battles. The destroyed remains of Zanari ships floated in the darkness. Whole space stations had been shattered. The signs of war were everywhere. The Zanari had fought hard, but they were losing badly. Admiral Cross ordered the fleet to proceed carefully. They moved toward the Zanari homeworld at moderate speed. Their sensors scanned everything, looking for threats or surprises. The Kryn were not here yet, but they would arrive soon. Every minute of preparation time was precious. The Zanari homeworld appeared on the view screens like a blue and green jewel. It looked surprisingly similar to Earth, with oceans and continents and white clouds. Alex stared at it and felt a strange connection. These aliens lived on a world that looked like his own. They breathed air and needed water. They were not so different from humans after all, but the space around the planet told a darker story. Wreckage floated everywhere. Pieces of destroyed ships drifted in slow orbits. Some of the debris was still glowing from recent explosions. Closer to the planet, a small group of Zanari ships maintained a defensive position. They looked damaged and desperate, like the last survivors of a terrible battle. Ambassador Lyra's face appeared on Admiral Cross's screen. The relief in her expression was overwhelming. Her skin glowed with colors that Christine Yang's translation program identified as joy and hope, mixed with disbelief. The Zanari had not truly believed that anyone would answer their call. They had sent the message hoping for a miracle, never expecting it to actually happen. To see 47 warships suddenly appear in their system was beyond anything they had imagined. The human fleet might not be huge by galactic standards, but to the dying Zanari civilization, it looked like salvation arriving just in time. Admiral Cross did not waste time on greetings or ceremonies. She needed information immediately. When would the Kryn arrive? How many ships would they bring? What were the defensive capabilities of the remaining Zanari forces? Every minute mattered, and there was no time for politeness when lives were at stake. Lyra transmitted the tactical data quickly. Her people had been tracking the Kryn fleet for days. The enemy would arrive in exactly 72 hours. They had approximately 3,000 combat vessels of various sizes. Small fighters, medium cruisers, large battleships, and even bigger command ships. It was a massive force designed to crush any opposition. The Zanari had about 200 ships left that could still fight. Most of them were damaged. Their weapon systems were not working at full power. Their shields were weak. Their crews were exhausted from constant fighting and running. They would fight to the last, but everyone knew they could not win alone. Even with the human fleet added to their numbers, the math was terrible. They would be outnumbered more than 40-1. The Kryn would have overwhelming firepower and endless waves of attack craft. Any reasonable military strategist would say the defense was hopeless. But Admiral Cross did not give up easily. She began issuing orders immediately. Her commands were clear and precise. She divided the human fleet into 3 battle groups. Each group would have a specific role in the coming fight. Together, they would create a defense that used every advantage they had while minimizing their weaknesses. Battle Group Alpha would be the Anvil. Captain Diana Foster would command all the heavy battleships and cruisers. These ships had the thickest armor and the most powerful weapons. They would form the main defensive line, holding position and dealing devastating damage to anything that came close. Their job was simple: stand firm and hit hard. Battle Group Beta would be the hammer. Captain Frank Weber would lead the carrier Liberty and all the fast attack ships. They would not hold any fixed position. Instead, they would move constantly, striking at weak points in the enemy formation. Their fighters would swarm around Kryn ships, attacking from unexpected angles. Their speed and mobility would create chaos in the enemy ranks. Battle Group Gamma would be the shield. Commander Alex Hunter would command the medium cruisers along with the Zenari vessels. They would form a close defensive ring around the planet itself. If any enemy ships broke through the outer defenses, this group would stop them. They were the last line of protection for the billions of Zenari on the surface below. The Zenari watched the human preparations with growing amazement. The speed and efficiency impressed them. Human crews worked together with perfect coordination. Ships moved into position with precision. Weapons were tested and calibrated. Defensive systems were optimized. In just a few hours, the human fleet had transformed the space around the Zenari homeworld into a fortress. But what amazed the Zenari most was the attitude of the human crews. The Zenari were terrified of the coming battle. They had faced the Kryn before and knew the horror that was approaching. Many Zenari could barely function because of their fear. They shook and cried and struggled to do their jobs. The humans showed no such fear. They worked with focus and purpose. Some of them even joked and laughed while preparing their weapons. Pilots painted funny pictures on their fighters. Gunners gave nicknames to their cannons. Engineers sang songs while making repairs. To the Zenari, this behavior seemed insane. How could anyone be calm when facing certain death? Ambassador Lyra asked Christine Yang about this. Christine smiled and tried to explain. She said that humans dealt with fear differently than Zenari. They acknowledged the danger but refused to let it paralyze them. They used humor to keep their spirits up. They focused on their jobs instead of worrying about things they could not control. It was a survival mechanism that evolution had given them during millions of years on a deadly world. Lyra struggled to understand. She asked if the humans were not afraid at all. Christine laughed and admitted that everyone was afraid. But fear did not have to control you. You could feel fear and still do your job. You could acknowledge danger and still fight. That was what made humans different. They had learned to function despite their fear, not because they had no fear at all. As the hours counted down to the Kryn arrival, Admiral Cross prepared one final element of her strategy. She called for volunteers for a special mission. It would be extremely dangerous. The chances of survival were not good, but if it worked, it could change the entire battle. She explained the mission to her commanders. They would need ships willing to make suicide runs deep into enemy territory. These ships would carry special weapons that could devastate large groups of enemy vessels. But getting close enough to use those weapons would be incredibly risky. Many of the volunteer ships would probably be destroyed. The Admiral expected maybe a dozen volunteers. She got responses from every single ship in the fleet. Every commander wanted to be part of the special mission. Every crew member was willing to risk their life for the plan to work. Admiral Cross had to choose only 12 ships because that was all they could spare from the main defenses. The chosen ships began preparing immediately. Their defensive systems were stripped away to make room for more weapons. Their engines were modified for maximum speed. Their cargo holds were filled with the most destructive weapons in the human arsenal. Nuclear missiles modified for space combat. These were not the massive bombs that could destroy planets. These were tactical nuclear weapons designed to create electromagnetic pulses and shockwaves. When detonated in the middle of a tightly packed formation of ships, they would disable electronics and tear through hulls. One missile could cripple dozens of vessels. 12 ships carrying hundreds of these weapons could devastate the Kryn fleet. The countdown continued. 72 hours became 60, then 48, then 24. The defenders used every minute to prepare. They drilled constantly, practicing coordinated attacks and defensive maneuvers. They studied the Kryn tactics and looked for weaknesses. They checked and rechecked every system on every ship. Finally, with just 1 hour remaining, Admiral Cross broadcast a message to the entire combined fleet. Her face appeared on every screen. Her voice reached every crew member, human and Zanari alike. She spoke simply and honestly. The battle ahead would be difficult. Many would not survive. But they were fighting for something important. They were fighting for innocent lives. They were fighting against tyranny and conquest. They were fighting to prove that the strong had a duty to protect the weak. The Kryn thought they were invincible. They thought numbers and firepower could overcome everything. Today they would learn they were wrong. Today they would face an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. Today they would face humans from Earth, the Deathworlders who refused to surrender, and today they would lose. The Kryn fleet appeared exactly when predicted. 3,000 ships emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. They materialized at the edge of the star system like a swarm of mechanical locusts. Their vessels were angular and ugly, designed purely for war with no consideration for beauty or grace. On the bridge of the horizon, Admiral Cross watched the tactical display. The screen was covered with red contacts representing enemy ships. There were so many that they almost looked like a solid mass rather than individual vessels. Any normal person would feel overwhelming fear looking at that display. But the Admiral's face remained calm and focused. The Kryn wasted no time. They began advancing immediately, moving in tight swarms toward the planet. Their formation was precise and coordinated. They had done this many times before. They expected this battle to follow the same pattern as all their previous victories. They would overwhelm the defenses with superior numbers. They would destroy the defending ships. They would conquer another world. Admiral Cross let them come. She watched them cross the first marker line in space, then the second. The Kryn were moving exactly as her intelligence predicted. They were following their programmed tactics without deviation. They were confident in their superiority. That confidence would be their downfall. When the Kryn crossed the third marker line, Admiral Cross gave a single word command. Now Battle Group Beta launched from its hiding position behind one of the system's moons. Captain Frank Weber's carrier strike force had been concealed there, masked by the moon's natural magnetic interference. The Kryn sensors had not detected them. Now 200 human fighters screamed into space, their pilots yelling with adrenaline and excitement. The Kryn swarm never saw the attack coming. The human fighters hit them from the side, missiles and railgun fire tearing through the tightly packed formation. The Kryn were programmed to expect frontal attacks. They were not prepared for a flanking strike. They took several precious seconds to respond, and those seconds cost them dearly. Lieutenant Sam Rivers weaved his fighter through a storm of enemy fire. His targeting computer highlighted enemies faster than he could track them. He squeezed the trigger and watched a Kryn corvette explode in a brilliant flash. His wingman, Lieutenant Nina Patel, destroyed 2 more before they could turn to face her. All around them, human pilots were performing similar feats of skill and courage. The Kryn formation began to break apart. Groups of ships peeled away from the main swarm to engage the unexpected threat. This was exactly what Admiral Cross wanted. A unified enemy was strong. A divided enemy was vulnerable. She had created chaos where the Kryn expected order. As the Kryn forces split up to counter the fighters, Battle Group Alpha opened fire. Captain Diana Foster's battleships had been positioned to take maximum advantage of the confusion. The Vengeance led the assault, its massive railguns firing with thunderous power. Each shot traveled at tremendous speed, carrying devastating kinetic energy. The Kryn capital ships shuddered under the impacts. Their armor had been designed to resist their own energy weapons, but it could not withstand the raw physics of human kinetic weapons. Railgun slugs punched through hulls like paper. Ships that had seemed invincible moments before now exploded or drifted helplessly in space. On the Defiance, Lieutenant Maria Santos coordinated targeting solutions with deadly precision. Her sharp eyes picked out priority targets from the mass of enemies. She fed coordinates to the weapon systems with smooth efficiency. Chief Engineer Paul Chen pushed the ship's reactors beyond their safe limits, giving the weapons more power for each shot. Commander Alex Hunter watched his crew work with pride. They had trained for only a few weeks, but they fought like veterans. They anticipated each other's needs. They worked together seamlessly. This was what humans did best: adapt and overcome. The Zanari forces, inspired by the human ferocity, pushed their damaged ships forward into the battle. Ambassador Lyra herself commanded a destroyer that had lost half its weapons. She watched in amazement as the humans fought with a combination of skill, courage, and aggressive determination that her people had never witnessed. The Deathworlders were living up to their reputation, but despite the initial success, the numbers were still overwhelming. The Kryn were taking heavy losses, but they had so many ships that it barely seemed to matter. For every enemy destroyed, 10 more moved forward to take its place. The Kryn did not retreat. They did not hesitate. They just kept coming, wave after wave of mechanical death. The human fleet was performing brilliantly, better than anyone had hoped. But simple mathematics suggested they could not sustain this forever. Eventually, they would run out of ammunition. Eventually, their weapons would overheat. Eventually, the sheer weight of numbers would tell. Unless something changed, the Kryn would eventually win through attrition. Admiral Cross had been waiting for this moment. She had planned for it. Now she played her final card, the ace she had been holding for exactly this situation. She gave the order to the 12 volunteer ships. The Suicide Squadron broke from the defensive formation. 12 ships, stripped of most defensive systems and loaded with nuclear weapons, accelerated at maximum speed directly toward the heart of the Kryn fleet. They moved so fast that the enemy barely had time to react. Defensive fire tore into them, destroying 2 ships immediately. But the other 10 kept coming. The Kryn assumed the ships were trying to ram them. They concentrated fire on the approaching vessels, trying to destroy them before impact. They destroyed 3 more. But 7 ships made it through the defensive fire and into the center of the Kryn formation. Then those 7 ships launched their payloads. Hundreds of modified nuclear missiles erupted from their cargo bays. The missiles covered the short distance to their targets in seconds. The Kryn finally realized what was happening, but it was too late to stop it. The nuclear weapons detonated almost simultaneously. Space lit up with brilliant flashes that rivaled the system's sun. The explosions created massive electromagnetic pulses that cascaded through the tightly packed Kryn formation. Electronic systems failed across hundreds of ships. Shockwaves tore through hulls that were pressed too close together. Secondary explosions rippled through the fleet as damaged ships collided with each other. The WEO 7 volunteer ships that had delivered the weapons activated their emergency, faster than light drives, and jumped away to safety. They had accomplished their mission. They had delivered a devastating blow to the very heart of the enemy fleet. The Kryn formation dissolved into chaos. Nearly half their ships were destroyed or disabled. The survivors lost their coordination. Some tried to regroup. Others fired blindly at anything nearby. The swarm intelligence that had made them so dangerous was broken. They were no longer a unified force. They were just individual ships in desperate trouble. Admiral Cross pressed the advantage immediately. She ordered all battle groups to attack at maximum intensity. The human and Zanari ships moved forward together, hitting the disorganized enemy from all directions. It was no longer a defensive battle. It had become a rout. The Kryn fought back with desperate fury, but their coordination was gone. Their overwhelming numbers no longer mattered because they could not use them effectively. Human fighters danced through their broken formations, destroying ship after ship. Human battleships hammered them with railgun fire that they could not avoid or defend against. Finally, something happened that the Kryn had never done before. They retreated. The surviving ships turned away from the planet and activated their faster-than-light drives. They jumped away in disorder, fleeing without coordination or control. The mighty Kryn fleet, which had crushed so many civilizations, was running away in terror from the Deathworlders who refused to be conquered. The silence after the battle was almost as overwhelming as the noise during it. For several minutes, nobody spoke. Crews sat at their stations, staring at their screens in disbelief. They had won. Against impossible odds, outnumbered 40-1, They had actually won. Admiral Cross was the first to break the silence. She ordered damage reports from all ships. The responses came in slowly as commanders assessed their situations. 7 human ships had been completely destroyed. Another 15 were heavily damaged and barely functional. Many others had taken significant damage but could still operate. The cost had been high, but they had survived. The Zanari losses were even worse. They had started with only 200 ships, and half of them were gone now. But they had survived. Their homeworld was safe. Their civilization would continue. For the first time in months, they had hope for the future. On the surface of the Zanari homeworld, billions of people watched the battle's conclusion on their screens. Cities that had been preparing for evacuation now erupted in celebration, the streets filled with Zanari dancing and singing in their melodic language. Many cried tears of relief and joy. They had been saved by strangers from across the galaxy, by the Deathworlders who had answered their desperate call. Ambassador Lyra stood on the bridge of the horizon beside Admiral Cross. Her skin glowed with colors that represented overwhelming gratitude and deep respect. She struggled to find words that could express what she was feeling. How could she thank someone for saving her entire species from extinction? But there was also a question troubling her, something she needed to understand. She asked the Admiral why humans had come. Why had they risked everything for people they had never met? Why had they traveled across the galaxy to fight for a world that was not their own? What could possibly motivate such incredible sacrifice? Admiral Cross was quiet for a long moment, thinking about how to answer. Finally, she began to speak. She explained that humans had a complicated history. For thousands of years, they had fought brutal wars against each other over land, resources, religion, and ideology. They had done terrible things to their own kind. But despite all that darkness, they had also always been capable of incredible compassion and selflessness. When someone called for help, when someone was in danger, humans responded. It was instinctive, something fundamental to their nature. They could not simply stand by and watch others suffer when they had the power to help. It was part of what made them human. The Admiral continued, explaining that perhaps this trait came from evolving on such a harsh world. Earth was dangerous in ways that most civilized species could barely imagine. Gravity that could crush visitors from lighter worlds. Weather that could kill in minutes. Predators that had evolved alongside humans to be faster, stronger, and more deadly. Diseases and parasites that constantly threatened survival. Humans understood what it meant to fight for survival every single day. They understood the value of working together against common threats. They understood that alone they were weak, but together they were strong. Maybe that was why they could not abandon the Zanari. They saw themselves in the desperate plea for help. They remembered their own struggles and knew they had to respond. Or perhaps, Admiral Cross added with a slight smile, they simply could not stand watching bullies win. Humans had a deep hatred of unfairness and tyranny. They had spent their entire history fighting against oppression. When they saw the Kryn trying to conquer and destroy innocent people, something in their nature demanded they fight back. It was not logical. It was not safe. But it was right. Lyra listened to these words with growing understanding. She was beginning to comprehend what made humans so different from other species. They were survivors who had learned to turn their harsh world's challenges into strengths. They were fighters who refused to accept defeat. They were protectors who could not ignore calls for help. They were Deathworlders in the truest sense, shaped by adversity into something formidable. In the days following the battle, the human fleet helped repair Zanari defenses. Engineers from both species worked together, sharing knowledge and technology. The humans showed the Zanari how to build better shields and more effective weapons. The Zanari shared their understanding of faster-than-light navigation and energy management. Both civilizations learned from each other. Military officers trained together, with humans teaching the Zanari new tactical approaches. The Zanari had always fought defensively, trying to minimize casualties. The humans taught them that sometimes aggressive action was necessary. Sometimes you had to take risks and hit hard to protect what you loved. The Zanari were peaceful by nature, but they were learning that peace sometimes required the strength to fight. Diplomatic relations were established quickly. Both governments recognized that this partnership could benefit everyone. Trade agreements were discussed. Cultural exchanges were planned. Scientists began collaborating on research projects. Humanity had found its first true allies among the stars, and both species were determined to make the relationship strong. But everyone knew this was not the end. The Kryn would return eventually. They had been defeated but not destroyed. They would regroup, repair their ships, and come back with new strategies. The next battle might be even harder than this one. Both the humans and Zanari understood this reality. However, when the Kryn returned, they would face something very different from what they encountered before. They would not be fighting scattered, terrified prey anymore. They would be facing a unified defense of humans and Zanari fighting side by side, two species from different worlds combining their strengths and covering each other's weaknesses. The Deathworlders and the people they had saved, standing together against tyranny. Commander Alex Hunter stood on the observation deck of the Defiance, looking down at the Zanari homeworld. His ship was scheduled to remain in the system for another month, before rotating back to Earth for major repairs. He thought about everything that had happened. He thought about the crew members who had died in the battle, friends he would never see again. He thought about the new friends he had made among the Zanari. The universe was vast and mysterious. It contained dangers that humans had never imagined. Hostile species like the Kryn, who wanted only to conquer and destroy, but it also contained potential allies, beings who shared similar values and dreams. There were new technologies to discover, new worlds to explore, and new friendships to forge. Alex realized that humanity was at a turning point. For all of human history, they had been alone on their small blue world, fighting only among themselves. Now they were part of something larger. They were members of a galactic community. They had responsibilities that extended beyond their own planet. They had allies who depended on them, and they had enemies who threatened everything they valued. It was both frightening and exciting. The future was uncertain and dangerous, but humans had always faced uncertainty and danger. That was what they did best. They survived. They adapted. They overcame. And now they would do it on a galactic scale. Back on Earth, the news of the victory had spread quickly. People celebrated in the streets. They were proud of their species and what they had accomplished. But they also understood that this was just the beginning. Earth would need to build more ships, train more crews, and prepare for future conflicts. The peaceful days of isolation were over. Humanity had stepped onto the galactic stage, and there was no going back. The governments of Earth began massive new programs. Shipyards expanded. Military academies opened new courses in interstellar warfare. Scientists worked on improving weapons and defenses. Diplomats prepared to make contact with other civilizations. Everyone understood that humanity needed to be ready for whatever came next. But the most important change was not technological or military. It was philosophical. Humans had proven something to themselves and to the galaxy. They had proven that they would fight for others, not just for themselves. They had proven that strength meant protecting the weak, not exploiting them. They had proven that even a small force fighting for the right reasons could overcome overwhelming odds. The message that humanity sent to the galaxy that day was clear and unmistakable. The Deathworlders had arrived. They had answered the call for help. They had fought against impossible odds and won, and they would do it again as many times as necessary for any species that needed their help. The Kryn had learned a painful lesson. Numbers and technology were not enough to guarantee victory. Spirit and determination mattered. Courage and sacrifice mattered, and sometimes the smallest force, fighting for something greater than themselves, could change the course of history. Ambassador Lyra returned to her people and told them stories of the humans. She described their strange humor in the face of danger. She explained their incredible adaptability and creativity. She shared Admiral Cross's words about why humans had come to help. And the Zanari listened with wonder and gratitude. The Zanari began to understand something profound. The universe was not just divided between predators and prey. There was a third category, protectors. Beings who were strong enough to conquer but chose instead to defend. Species who saw suffering and felt compelled to stop it. The humans were protectors, and the Zanari were grateful beyond words to have found them.